Hello and welcome, and thank you for logging on to our BAME Domestic Abuse webinar. The aim of this session is to sensitively discuss issues surrounding domestic abuse within the BAME community. So why focus on the BAME community? So as we know, inequality for minority groups is widespread and extends to the criminal justice system, healthcare, housing and schooling. The Office of National Statistics data shows that the rates of domestic abuse among BAME communities were higher than their white counterparts. Whilst BAME people are subjected to over-policing for certain crimes, research highlights under-policing for domestic abuse in minority communities due to cultural sensitivity. This is also in line with mistrust of the police, which has intensified by practices such as using male translators for female victims or responding inappropriately to abuse practices such as honour-based violence. I'd now like to add that figures are not completely representative of the problem due to the chronic underreporting of domestic abuse within our communities. So as I mentioned earlier, I would like to encourage you to please ask any questions, no matter how small, and we will endeavour to answer them as clearly as we can. So I'd like to introduce you to our panel today. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Siobhan Cranjan-Arsov and I work for the Ipswich and Suffolk Council for Racial Equality. My role is to engage with our BAME community to ensure their voices are heard at an official level regarding health inequalities. I would also like to introduce you to our panel of speakers. So if I can introduce you to Katherine, first of all, from Lighthouse Women's Aid.
Good afternoon, I'm Katherine Ahluwalia and I'm the training manager for Lighthouse Women's Aid based in Ipswich but covering the whole of Suffolk.
Thank you, Katherine. We do have two other speakers that we're waiting to attend. They're still coming in, they're going to be a little bit late. So I'll introduce, we've got Molin coming along from Phoebe. And we have Bal Howard, who is our expert on BAME, domestic abuse, honour abuse and child forced marriage. We will also have a clinical lead with us as well, it's Dr. Dean Dorset. So thank you to everybody who is attending, and I would like to welcome Katherine now to discuss the work she does and how this supports victims of domestic abuse.
I just wanted to start actually with a poem, because part of my passion is that we put the survivor's voice at the centre of all our services. And this is a poem, actually, it's from a book called My Red Quilt, which is poems and work by survivors of domestic abuse. And it's called He Never Hit Me. He screamed in my face, but he didn't hit me. He punched the wall, but he didn't hit me. He told me I was useless, but he didn't hit me. He wouldn't allow me to see my family, but he didn't hit me. He checked my phone, but he didn't hit me. He tracked my location, but he didn't hit me. He called me stupid, ugly, but he didn't hit me. He told me he was the only one that would put up with me, but he didn't hit me. He made me feel guilty for not wanting to have sex, but he didn't hit me. He humiliated me in front of people, but he didn't hit me. He refused to help with the children, but he didn't hit me. He controlled my finances, but he didn't hit me. He made me hate myself, but he never hit me. And the reason why that resonated with me for this talk today is because, having worked with different communities and people that we want to come to our services but are hesitant to do so, it's really interesting how people often minimise what the abuser does and will say things like he's a good man, when clearly he's not to us when we risk assess them. But what I wanted to just say to you is that, you know, there is a major cultural shift going on at the moment. We've got the new domestic abuse bill is back in the House of Commons. You know, we are looking at a really big shift in how we approach domestic abuse. And we have now got to the point where it is everybody's business. So all of us have to look to all our communities, to our colleagues at work, to everybody, you know, friends, family, neighbours, people within our faith communities, and we have to ask those questions that sometimes might make us feel uncomfortable, but it's really important that we do that. The other reason that that poem resonated with me is we're actually at Lighthouse this year, we're celebrating our 45th year in Ipswich, which is, you know, a major landmark for us. And, you know, when we started, it was part of the battered wives movement. That's how domestic abuse services started back in those years ago. Well, we're no longer looking at battered wives. What we're actually seeing, our services are for women and children. What we're actually seeing is women and children who are coercively controlled. And that particularly includes psychological, emotional and economic abuse, which is why that poem resonated, I think. So it's really important that we look at this shift and we ask those questions. It's not always recognised as abuse. A lot of people don't understand that coercive control and controlling your life, shrinking your world, is actually classed as abuse. So we've got two venues in Ipswich. We've got the Refuge, which is where high risk women and children have fled from their homes, probably from another part of the country, to come to our refuge to keep safe. And we also have the centre. The centre, based in Ipswich, is a one-stop shop for domestic abuse. So generally, the women and children that come into the centre, all of our services have been running the whole year by telephone or on Zoom. There isn't any service that isn't running. But what would happen, the sort of journey that you take, is people come in, we would do a risk assessment on everybody. We do a domestic abuse risk assessment to categorise them as standard, medium or high risk, because that's very important. We do crisis intervention. So if they're at crisis point and they need to get to a refuge or we need to get them safe, we will sort that out for them. We also have legal, financial and housing surgeries all around domestic abuse, so they can get those services. And then generally, once people are out of that sort of emergency service, what we do is we get them onto the therapeutic programs, because the way to break the cycle of abuse is education and awareness. So, for example, the most common program that most people do is the Freedom Program, which is about the tactics of the abuser and their behaviours. Following that, they'll do Power to Change, which is about working on the survivor's self-esteem and assertiveness skills and helping them to rebuild their lives. We also do Who's in Charge, which is child to adult abuse, which again, a lot of people don't recognise as domestic abuse. And we do Escape the Trap, which is for young people. It's like the Freedom Programme, but for teenagers. And then we do other programs to help women, to help mothers rebuild their relationships with their children, because once you've been in a domestic abuse situation, those relationships will often break down. So one of our passions is lifelong learning, and it's because of those services that we had in the centre that we brought in the training service. So the training service, we work with professionals in the workplace. So we help HR people, line managers, help people who disclose domestic abuse, and we encourage them to ask questions and help them to signpost. We also do lots of training with any charities or agencies who are in a one-to-one situation with people where they might disclose domestic abuse. And also we do mixed group training, so community ambassadors, community champions, therapists, anybody like that can come on our training, because we know that to reach these communities, we've got to reach out and we've got to train people to ask the right questions and to know where to signpost people to, as well as knowing what the signs of domestic abuse are. You know, the stats on these haven't changed, and exactly as Siobhan said, we know that in these minority communities it is very high and it is underreported. The national stats for domestic abuse are 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men. In Suffolk it's 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men. Nationally it's 1 in 4. But if we look at the fact it's underreported, it is most likely to be 1 in 2. So all of us know people within our communities that are experiencing domestic abuse, and we need to reach out to them. It is underreported and it is underpoliced. We know that for sure. 2 women a week are killed by a partner or former partner, and 3 women a week take their own lives to escape domestic abuse. So every week 5 women are dying from domestic abuse, and we're not investigating it properly. And if there are barriers to policing, we know that's going to be a big factor. We're delighted that we have, after we've applied for a lot of funding and we finally got funding, we've now got a community worker, because we are based in a centre, everybody comes to us. But we've got a new community worker, and her job is to go out to marginalised groups to educate them about the signs of domestic abuse, maybe run programmes for them, help train up champions and ambassadors. But, you know, all of the services have got to work harder to reach these communities. As chair of the IDAF, which is the Ipswich Domestic Abuse Forum, I regularly see all the stats for all the agencies which break down people's ethnicity. And I know for a fact that we are not reaching the people that we need to be reaching. So it is really important. And if you take any message away from today, the message is that your human rights supersede any cultural or religious belief. So everybody has the right to live free from abuse. It doesn't matter what your culture is, your religion, your ethnicity, it doesn't matter. Your human rights supersede that. And I would urge anybody who's worried that they might be in a domestic abuse relationship to reach out. I'm going to put 2 numbers on the chat. I'm going to put the Lighthouse number and also the 24-hour helpline number for domestic abuse. But I would also urge any professionals who are on here to get training and to really get the confidence to have professional curiosity to actually ask people the question. Siobhan and Jen and I were talking before we went live about well-being. You cannot separate domestic abuse from your well-being. It directly affects your well-being. So anybody who is talking to anybody in their community about well-being, you need to ask those questions. It is really, really important. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is that we need to have, and we are seeing this change, there is much more of a holistic approach to domestic abuse. Because, you know, for years we have worked with survivors, and that will continue. That's what we need to do. But we also need to work with perpetrators, and we're very lucky in Suffolk. We have got up and running at the moment 2 very, very good perpetrator programs running. One is ISCRE, which is a local charity, and the other is the domestic abuse team are running a perpetrator program. So you need somebody working with survivors, some people working with perpetrators. And the reason why working with perpetrators is so important is because we are seeing serial perpetrators at high risk conferences. So we're saving people, we're getting them out of the situation, and then they're moving on to someone else. So that's really crucial. And then the other work that we do that I'm really proud of is we do a program called Expect Respect, which is a healthy relationship program that we deliver in schools. We'll go to any young person's organisation, and by the end of this summer term, we will have delivered to over 8,000 young people, because that's the prevention work. So this circle of holistic, you need survivors, perpetrators and prevention, and it's key. And the other thing, and this is very high on the national agenda with the new domestic abuse bill, is we need a coordinated community response. We can't sit in silos working separately. All the communities have to work together, and we have to reach out to people, and we have to talk to as many people as we possibly can. So I think if you take any messages from today, it is that you need to ask those questions. And also, you know, it's really interesting because something we do on Expect Respect is we encourage peer challenging. And what we mean by that is because we know, particularly when we're talking to teenagers, they're going to talk to their friends about their relationships. They're not necessarily going to talk to their parents. So what we say to young people is, if your friend is telling you about a relationship that really doesn't sound healthy, you need to say to them, that's not okay. Let's go and talk to a trusted adult. But also, if your friend is disrespecting somebody that they're in a relationship with, you need to challenge that behaviour too. And this is part of the shift. We can no longer turn a blind eye to domestic abuse. You know, years ago when we started, as I said to you, it was the part of the battered wives movement. The police and everybody in the communities turned a blind eye on domestic abuse. Well, now we've got to the stage where physical abuse is no longer socially acceptable, but what we're seeing is this huge growth in coercive controlling behaviour, emotional, psychological and economic abuse. Well, we can no longer turn a blind eye, and it's actually the silence that keeps it going. So again, my message to you is that domestic abuse is everybody's business. We can't pretend and we can't look the other way. And as we've said with the figures, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men, all of us are going to know people. So we need to ask those questions, and we need to say to people, are you safe at home? Is there anybody you're frightened of? I am concerned for you. I'm always here if you want to talk to me, so that you leave the door open to them. The women that we see that come through our programs, there's 2 questions or 2 statements that they make all the time. One is, when they do the freedom program, everybody says at the end, why wasn't I taught this in school? And we can now say to them, we're teaching young people this. So that's a good thing. But the other thing people say is, no one ever asked me. I went to A&E, I went to faith leaders, I went to the school. There were very obvious signs that there was domestic abuse, but none of those professionals actually asked me the question. And what the women say to us is, if somebody asked me, I would have told them. So it's really important now that we are brave enough to have that professional curiosity and ask those questions. So again, I would urge anybody to do training, because part of the training is where you learn what to do with that disclosure and where you learn to signpost people to, and it gives you the confidence to ask those questions.
And I just before we sort of move on to questions, I just want to absolutely double down on Katherine's points around 2 bits. So one around intellectual curiosity. So the places that Katherine and Mollen help operate and serve in are the very tip of the iceberg. Okay, so they are the worst of the worst. And if you think 1 in 3 women will be abused, and then you track that back to how many men will be actually prosecuted sort of for it, the percentages drop off. And if the outcome we want at the end of it is a prosecution, then that's abysmal. But in actual fact, what we would always find is that sometimes empowering a woman or somebody in an abusive relationship can be sometimes all that's needed. It doesn't let the statutory organizations off the hook, but sometimes when somebody has been through repeated trauma like that, the one thing that they need is knowing that somebody cares, and somebody asking the question is somebody I'm sort of caring. So yes, I would absolutely double down on the intellectual curiosity bit, and yes, just one asking the question and giving the person space to speak their truth. And just one thing before I go on, because I do tend to waffle. There is a brilliant sort of TED talk by if you just Google Steiner on the impact of domestic abuse on a woman, and what it did, especially for me when I saw it a few sort of years ago. I will put the link in the chat. What it did for me is that it just opened my eyes that the typical person that we expect to be abused isn't the typical person, and we should keep our minds as open as possible, because this lady was a chief exec, graduate of Harvard, and all the rest of it, and still she was a victim, and quite a sort of a violent victim. So yes, I'm absolutely double downing on the intellectual curiosity and saying that sometimes all that's needed is somebody to care.
Can I just say, I totally, absolutely agree with that 100%. And I would also say somebody to care, but also someone who believes them, because the perpetrator will say no one will believe you. Just also to fill in that TED talk, it's a lady called Leslie Steiner.
Yeah.
It's called Crazy Love. Yeah. And you know, there's another TED talk by a lady called Nora Casey. Yeah. And they're very similar. And actually, Nora Casey was on the Irish version of Dragon's Den. Mm. Very successful woman. And you're absolutely right. Domestic abuse has no boundaries. It doesn't matter about your gender, your sexuality, your age, your ethnicity, your religion. None of those matter. It affects everybody, and it is often the people that you don't imagine that it is. So that's absolutely really, really important. And the other thing to mention is we do see people who come to us in, you know, a very, you know, traumatized state. They don't just survive, they thrive. You know, there is a way out of this. It doesn't matter how long it's been going on. With the right help and support and education and awareness, you can actually live a really fulfilling, empowered life where you thrive and you blossom. And I can't tell you how many times we've seen that. It's been incredible. So there's always hope. That's the other thing.
Thank you very much, guys. That was great. I was thinking we might do is go to Molin, and then we'll go for all the questions then, and we'll go through as a panel.
Right. Thank you very, very much for inviting me, for inviting us from Phoebe, Siobhan. ISCRE, the NHS social prescribing team. And just thank you for all those who have attended this. You know, it's really encouraging that, you know, people want to know more about the experiences of Black and minoritized ethnic women in Suffolk. And so I just thought I would just touch and sort of explore the concept of intersectionality and how that relates to migrant women. So just a quick introduction to who we are. We started in 2008, and we were formerly known as Zimbabwe Women's Resource Centre. When we came to the UK as Zimbabwean social workers, we set up this project, which we thought was just for our children, which was the Zimbabwe Youth Project. And then it became the Zimbabwe Women's Resource Centre. And I'm explaining this because when people became aware of our work and we're based at Tower Street, they just thought, well, that must be a migrant women's organization. Let me go and try and seek help. That's how we had women come to us, because of our name. And actually, I think 90% of the women who've come to Phoebe, now it is known, were never from Zimbabwe. They were from all over the world. But because of our name, they were able to approach us. And I felt that was really important, because that's what we offer. We're a specialist organization, women's charity, and we support women who have experienced domestic violence. We offer casework and advocacy, signposting, and we also work with young girls in our self-esteem project. So that's what we do in Suffolk. And so how we came about to sort of work and offer, it was never our intention to actually offer. We didn't realize much of the prevalence of domestic violence amongst Black women, Asian women in Suffolk. But in 2008, we realized that there was this group of women, this special group of women who, because of their immigration status, they were not able to seek help in a women's refuge. We were amazed that wherever we called across the country, we were never able to place a woman, you know, into safety, and literally women had to remain within that abusive relationship. So that's how we came across this work. It just came to us because, you know, women were so desperate. We're situated quite, you know, in a central place as well. We're based at the Citizen Advice Bureau building in Ipswich, and so we're in a focal, you know, sort of center. And also we were, in fact, we are, you know, quite near to Lighthouse Women's Aid, and so we've been able to have sort of a relationship with them, and they referred some of our women, their women to us who needed specialist, you know, support. So that's in a nutshell how we were formed and how our domestic violence work, developed and it evolved. It was out of need and out of desperation, out of, people really not knowing what to do and facing, real harm and not having anywhere to go, not having anywhere to turn to. Yeah. And this is how we sort of started looking at why is it that these women are facing this burden, extra, hardship. And clearly they were experiencing physical violence, sexual violence, economic, psychological, emotional. So, and this we knew was wrong. And so that was our difficulty as an organization and the women themselves. So this is what we were faced with. And I know that my colleague at Lighthouse has clearly sort of defined domestic abuse. But we wanted to go deeper, and so we've also been thinking and reading and networking with other sisters across, the UK who are supporting and helping migrant women. I need to just take make sure that my timing is still okay. So we wanted to we've been networking with them and learning and asking how can we help, how are we helping? And I think we've all hopefully have been following the fact that migrant women are more at risk, because of the multiple layers, of the multiple barriers that they face. And this is what, we've learned it can be and is called, it's part of what is called intersectionality, and we want to, as an organization, we've learned to evolve and we've learned to develop an intersectional practice, because domestic violence, domestic abuse is not just, straightforward for everybody. Women experience violence from different levels, and therefore we have to look at the reasons why they experience what they experience and how we can support and help them. With an understanding, that they have multiple, discrimination. I think here when I'll just read from my when dealing with domestic violence abuse victims, we need to not only look at more than just the gender aspect, that they are female and they're at risk and they're vulnerable, but we know that Black women have the added, vulnerability of experiencing racism. They have the vulnerability of experiencing poverty. Many of the women we deal and work with have a lot of poverty issues and social disadvantage, a lot of language barriers and immigration insecurities. Okay, so just wanted to, for those who've heard about intersectionality, I'll just show a video. But we realized that the multiple barriers we were talking about are deeper. And when we looked deeper into it and we learned about, the intersecting problems that, women face and why it is that, for example, some women would come to our organization with, they were able to seek refuge. They were able to, because of their legal status, we were able to place them. But before we place them, we'd say, well, we want to report this to the police and we want to make sure that he doesn't do this again, and we want to make sure that, everything is fine with you and your children. Then they'll say, oh, no, I can't go into the police because the police might, tell him this, And we realize that obviously women come from cultures, because of the foreign women who we work with, in their countries, the authorities are actually the enemy. So there's a layer of fear and mistrust that they bring along before they enter into the systems here, and the, very difficult, complex, sometimes, discriminatory practices that they experience here. From back home, their authorities, you would never trust them. You never ever go to the police. You don't report. You stay, within your home and you keep safe. So we found that it was really, really difficult to get women to open up and for us to be able to then really document, their experience, simply because, that layer that they've experienced from abroad and they're brought in, is just so difficult to break. We found at Phoebe and what this means to us, okay, intersectionality. So it has a lot of, it has three basic building blocks, and one of them, the first one we can talk about, is social identities, which are based on groups and communities that a person belongs to. And so a woman would come to us, and obviously she belongs to the African, she's an African woman, Black African woman, and she's brought over. And usually, well, I'll give an example of a woman who's been brought over from the Gambia, for example. She has worked in hospitality industry there, brought over and as a wife by someone here, white British, so her social class obviously is automatically she's of a lower class. You know, she's Black. She's female, you know, she has all those identities that that she brings along with her, and these will, you know, form part of her vulnerabilities to abuse. You know, so we found that women come over from abroad because they've been identified as not being able to speak English, not having the level of education to be able to report, to understand systems in this country. You know, they're handpicked in order to be then exploited and used and abused within this country. And so that identity that the perpetrators will recognize within this woman's you know, life, these are the ones that we as professionals have to look at and then understand that she has many, many layers, many, many barriers that she's struggling, you know, within because of, you know, who she is as a person. And so when she's experiencing violence or abuse of any shape and, you know, of any type, we have to understand her as an individual. And then we know that the second point that we look at and we've understood, you know, in our work and, you know, grappling to see how come these women face what they face. Systems of oppression, you know, so when Crenshaw talks about systems of oppression and intersectionality and the many intersecting sort of players within a person's life, you know, she mentioned that these systems of oppression refer to larger forces and structures operating in society, and these create inequalities and they reinforce exclusion. So they create the systems of, you know, inequality of oppression create inequalities and they reinforce exclusion. And so our women typically experience a lot of exclusion and just unequal access to a safe place to be when they are experiencing violence. Our women actually remain in a potentially life-threatening, you know, situation because the system doesn't allow them, because of the visa that they brought, that brought them into the country. Many times they are trafficked as in they are coerced to come into the country as a wife, so-called wife or so-called partner, and then they have their passports confiscated, and then they become almost slaves and are subjected to a lot of abuse from the perpetrator. So in order for us to try and remove her from this, we need a system, a bigger structure, which is supportive to these women and their families, which is more inclusive to them, and, you know, offer them, you know, an equal access to resources and an opportunity to come out of these violent relationships. So these norms that we have here, that migrants are just here to, you know, grab benefits, sometimes is not. It's quite a myth, because many migrants cannot just automatically access any benefits. You know, there are structures, there are systems in place to prevent that. So this is the difficulty we face, you know, as an organization, trying to help these women. There are the structures of this individual, this perpetrator, who has, you know, strength enough to, you know, really subject this woman to so much violence and control, coercive control, abusive control, and then the systems which are supposed to protect them are not always available for these women. I think this follows on, to from the previous point that, these identities that I've spoken about and the systems of oppression, they don't obviously work in isolation of each other. They all merge together. So when you see a Black woman coming in trying to, she cannot speak English, she hasn't even got her passport, she's afraid, she doesn't know what to do, but clearly she's been abused physically, and there are these sort of stereotypes that can sometimes just cause people to just dismiss her. It's too much effort to try and understand her story. So these systems, interplay and intersect, and therefore this woman is subjected to more abuse and just more sort of isolation and being pushed away and pushed out, and she's stuck in these sort of relationships which are abusive. And so we, that's what we struggle with. And I think nationally, I think 2012, we were part of, the movement that then enabled the Home Office to set up the Domestic and Destitution Violence Commission, which is now enabling migrant women with spouse visas to access resources, to access support. So this has been a milestone, for us, but still there are some women who fall away from that provision, women who are on visas that are not a spouse visa, and these women, basically they're being left, so that's the difficulty that women face. So they face quite a lot. I'll just try and make sure I've got enough time. Okay, I've said that. So I just wanted to look quickly before I run out of time. The power and control wheel that some of us might be aware of. So this is the generic power and control wheel for all women, including white British women in the UK. As you can see, they face physical violence, sexual violence, coercion, economic abuse, emotional abuse. As you can see, they can be isolated and stalked. The man can use children. So, these are the awful experiences that women, experiencing violence do face. And so to understand the intersecting, problems, barriers and difficulties and hurdles that, the BAME women face, I'll just direct you to the migrant. He not only threatens her physically because she's there with him and with her children, but he threatens her family wherever she's come from. He will also confiscate her passport. She can't find a job if he doesn't feel like it. So, for example, the woman we're supporting at the moment, her passport has been confiscated and the children, so she can't apply for anything. She has no identity documents because he knows she needs them. Many women have been trafficked in, as wives, and they've been made to be servants. Some of these, acts will never happen to a woman from this country. It's because somebody, the perpetrators know that this woman will never report. She can't speak the language. Literally, you have many men who bring women over, and this woman cannot even speak a word of English. And that's one of the signs you can tell, that this relationship is very unequal and uneven. What is it? Why is it? So that's another starting point when we're looking, at these potential types of relationship which may be unhealthy. And so the migrant woman has an added immigration status. It's a massive, massive, difficulty. Women will say no to help because they're afraid of deportation. Women will not report to the police because the police at times have been known to report these women to the Home Office. So these women live in perpetual fear. just quickly looking at the support for women before I finish, you know. So, you know, as professionals, just being more aware of these women and their multiple difficulties, their intersecting problems that they face. You know, they are fearful of authorities. They do not speak the language, you know, trying to, you know, make provision for language services. One of the things that we've learned over the many years that we've been working is to document each woman's story effectively in a proper, thorough report, because then we give that to her as her passport to the next agency she goes to, because people do not understand sometimes what or not she's been through. And because they do not understand, she will be just left and left and left. And so we give them a thorough report of the exact abuse they've gone through, all the necessary details that they need to have in order to be free of this, you know, relationship. And then agencies can be able to work and use that document. It's a key document, you know, for this person's life. Yeah, just her story is so important, and that also makes it clear, you know, for her that she doesn't have to repeat the same thing over and over to you know, many different people in her, you know, broken English, you know. So you know, and just you know, anti-discriminatory sort of practices, not stereotyping people and putting people under one you know, sort of blanket, because really women come with different multiple needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. Thank you so much. And what we'll do is we'll put the Phoebe's details into the Q&A box for everybody to have. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Val Howard now, who is going to present to you via her mobile phone. So please bear with us.
Thank you so much for asking me to come on. Sorry, I had technical traffic trouble getting on the line. So I'm Val Howard. I deliver a manner of training and have been doing for about 12 years. And I was projects officer for honour-based violence, forced marriage and female genital mutilation for Suffolk Police for 7.5 years. So dealing with the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic community on the issues of so-called honour-based violence. I know Marlene's talked a lot about the barriers that Black, Asian, minority, ethnic women face. So that's the honour, the shame, the no recourse to public funds, the modern slavery, sexual exploitation, trafficking, domestic servitude, the language barriers, can't be returned to the country of origin because they're deemed too at risk from their own families if they're returned. And when they're here, they don't understand British society, culture. Then mental health issues is a taboo, addiction, substance misuse is a taboo. But the biggest thing for the Asian and especially South Asian community, and I would say Middle Eastern community as well, is actually they're ostracized by their whole family. In normal domestic abuse, a person can leave, it's leaving one relationship. It's so difficult to walk away from one relationship. And actually, this is a person that needs to leave their whole family, their whole community and start afresh. And it's one of the biggest barriers about leaving that nurtured environment that they've been brought up to, even though it's abusive in some situations, it's leaving all of that. So when we talk about honour-based violence, forced marriage issues, what might cause somebody to have abuse? That's simply being in a relationship that the family don't approve of, you know, becoming westernised, wanting to wear makeup, wanting to wear westernised clothing, wanting an education, or simply just saying, no, I don't want to go through with it. Questioning, why do I have to go through with it? The things that are normally taken for granted by some communities, it's just unacceptable behaviour. There's a code of conduct, and if these rules are broken, there's a consequence, there's a punishment, i.e. if I was to fall in love with somebody. So I know we haven't got long, but I'm just so grateful I was able to speak today, because the one thing I want to share is my own personal journey, because it wasn't easy to walk away. So I was married in a child forced marriage. I was 17 years old and married in the northeast of England. I didn't have a choice. The threat from my own father was, if you don't go through with it, and you think about running away, I will find you and I will kill you and I will go to prison. And that threat was very real. Had a massive impact on my life for years to come that was going to follow. As I was married off in this country to West Yorkshire, where my husband, ex-husband, and the extended in-laws and the immediate in-laws controlled my entire life, as in terms of what I was going to wear, what I was going to cook, what I was going to eat. When I worked, I had to give my salary to them. I wasn't sometimes even given a pound to buy a bar of chocolate. Everything's controlled my entire life. Yet I'd go home to my own family and ask for help. They would send me back. So to me, it felt like I was a domestic slave by day and a sex slave by night, because of the daily rape almost from my husband, from that first night all the way through for 8.5 years of my life. When I fled and left, I wasn't just leaving him, I was leaving my own family. And as a result of me fleeing, I haven't seen my own family for over 25 years. And that's why I feel really passionately about helping women in the Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities, because there's additional factors at play. And following from that, fleeing around the country, keeping on the go because I couldn't be found by my own family. There was 3 missing reports for me, and I'd already gone to the police station the day before I'd left and explained that what was going to happen. So it's just really important for a professional to be there to understand what happens. Actually, the impact didn't happen until later on in my life. And then I hit mental health issues, and I couldn't get a therapist that could work with me because I was grieving for a family that was still alive and well. Nobody understood that. So the amount of therapists I had, I could count them all. And in the end, my way of coping was using prescription medication. I was on a heavy load of antidepressants, diazepam, propranolol, and I managed my life like that, and with alcohol as well. So when I presented with the crisis team here in Ipswich, they wouldn't assess me because I was off my face, basically, you know. But when I presented really well. There was nothing wrong with me. So with mental health services, it was a revolving door for 6 years of my life. That I actually ended up in rehab in Lowestoft. So residential rehab for 3 months. They saved my life. I was 43 before I got anywhere near to getting well. So actually, substance misuse, addiction, such a taboo subject, mental health issues, actually what is going on behind the scenes. Nobody knew what was happening or what I'd escaped from. So it's taken me years to heal from the trauma. And so actually my darkest past is now my greatest possession. So it's lovely to be able to share it with you in the brief time I have. And apologies that I couldn't get online as well. So I will leave it at that, and I'll stay on the line for any questions.
Thank you, Belle. That was very powerful. Thank you for sharing your story with us. I just wanted to know if any of our panel had anything to add.
Yeah, just absolute hats off to Belle for sharing that that story. It's very rare that we have such powerful stories, but it does show that how resilient women can be in the face of just multiple trauma. So anybody out there that needs help, the primary care and GPs have all been through limited training, but there is an increased awareness of it, and there is so much out there. So just offering the NHS as a first port of call. But yes, thanks, Val, for an incredibly powerful story.
Someone has also said that Bao is the most inspirational person ever, and thank you for sharing. The question is, with FGM, can we say that statistical report is almost inexistent or perhaps not up to date? And is it fair to say that the current pandemic most likely has put more women and children at risk of victimization?
Okay, so statistically, with FGM, so I'm going to rewind back. So mandatory recording duty for health. So mandatory recording duty came in for health back in 2015. So when we look at the statistical data, the data set is released from the Department of Health on FGM. Yes, it dropped during the pandemic. So what we were looking at the year before last was about 5,700 newly recorded cases. That was about 15 a day. And when we looked at last year's data recording set, it had dropped. And it was around about 600 per quarter. These are newly recorded cases. Anonymous data is fed into the Department of Health from health. Now, when I look at the statistical data in Suffolk, what we had when I first joined, rewinding back to 2009 with Suffolk Police, I left them about 4.5 years ago, but what we were looking at was 0 cases of FGM. Then it was 3 cases the following year. Then it was 13 cases in the first quarter of that year. But having done women's groups through Suffolk Refugee and men's groups, actually, talking about the issue of FGM, and the women's first language is English, so we use clay to mould female genitalia. And actually, there's always been a disclosure. In one group of 15 women here in Ipswich, 4 of them disclosed it happened to them. So, yes, statistically, the data last year, because of the pandemic, they have dropped to even 600 newly recorded cases per quarter. Quite significant, isn't it? I would say.
Thank you, Val. Thank you so much. So we've had there's a lot of messages on here about your presentations, ladies, and they were very, very well thought of. We have a question for Phoebe. I just want to get to the question for you. Someone has mentioned that I know you've answered it already, but I think it'd be quite nice to say: is there a fear that these trafficked women will be identified as illegal immigrants if they ask for help?
That there's a real fear. There's a real fear of deportation, and many women, once they've entered the UK, have left their families. They feel safe. They felt safe when they arrived. Sometimes, and like I said, trafficked is not just in the sense of being, put into a container. It's actually you're married, your family says goodbye to you, and they assume you're now married and you've gone abroad. And therefore, and this person obviously has, I think you've heard of mail order brides. Men actually go and bring over brides, and then, after a few months, they are then, abused. So these trafficked women do not understand the culture, do not understand the system here. And the first thing that they're told is, you will be deported if you report. And it's so difficult to try and get the stories out of these women. So they are really, really fearful. And it takes a lot to gain trust in them, and just to say, trust us, and, we'll keep your information. South of Black Sisters are doing some work, have done some work actually. They've identified that there are some authorities who, after women have reported to them, they have then handed these women over to the Home Office. This has happened. And they've come up with, a report called Safe to share report which they are working on at the moment, because women have been afraid to share their stories because of fear of deportation. So that's the main reason why women remain in these relationships, because they are told they would be deported. It's a really difficult situation that they face. And so what we do is we try and empower them, and we tell them that there's a way out and there's avenues, and we explain the law, and we seek out women from their communities. If for example she speaks if she's from Afghanistan, or if she's from the Gambia, somebody from within her own community, we always have links within whether here in Suffolk or in London mainly, where we network with other women's organizations, and we just get that person to explain to the woman that you're safe, you're in a women's organization, don't worry, they will help you, trust them, and then they begin to trust. So it's a really long process. It's very difficult. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Molyn. Thank you for that answer. So I'm aware of the time and that we're over, but I just wanted to ask one more question to the whole group, really, and it's from a lady called Wendy, and she's asked, in situations where leaving meant leaving your whole family, would offers of support to leave be rejected, or would the support be welcomed?
And what I would say, the support would be welcomed with open arms, but I think it's understanding what's behind that support. Are you, as a professional, trained to provide that support? I.e., I'm worried about my family finding me, so therefore the NHS number is a unique number. Can that number be made case sensitive? Who's going to do that? The national insurance number is a unique number. Who is going to shield and make that number case sensitive? That needs to be signed off by a superintendent within the police. So actually, as a victim said to me, she said, I will leave if you can guarantee my safety 100%. As a professional, I couldn't promise that. So yes, there's options like witness protection, but witness protection is a harsh process to go through. So actually, what kind of support is it that I'm offering? And I'll tell you what, last February, a girl said to me, she said, a roof over my head, that's great, you can provide that. Give me a box of food, great. And she says, support needs to go beyond a box of food. And she was a trafficked victim who was actually married on a spousal visa and then sold as a trafficked slave in the UK. She was from Latin America. But that was her words. Support needs to go beyond a box of food. So definitely, what kind of support? Are the professionals trained to provide the support? Is the question I'd ask everyone.
Does anybody else from the panel want to add to that?
Only just to agree 100% with Val, it needs to be wraparound support, and it's not easy. There is a reason why people go back to perpetrators, because actually it's not easy to leave. It increases the risk, and then they feel very isolated afterwards. Refuge is obviously one of the best places for people to go to if they need to. And for example, in our refuge, the resettlement team, the average stay in refuge is about 9 months, and then if you leave after that period, if you leave the refuge, our resettlement team support the women for 2 years after they've left. So Val's 100% right. It's not just getting people out of crisis. It's then the support afterwards, which needs to be specialist, professional, and long term, because they're even more at risk of going back when they get to those certain milestones, like leaving a refuge.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it here as we've gone over time, but I want to thank you all so much for your participation and attendance this evening. We hope to see you again. We will be holding another webinar next month, but in the meantime, in the question and answer, section, we will endeavour to answer all those questions that you have posed. And so we will be, if you'd like the answers to the questions, please send Jen or myself. I'll put my email address in as well. We can send you the answers. But thank you again, and thank you so much to our panel as well. Have a good evening.